Good morning. Good morning, people of LinkedIn. Good morning, beautiful folks, on this very dark, grey, rainy morning here in the UK. Good morning if you are watching us on YouTube as well, because we're now live on YouTube as well. Good morning, Sam. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, end of the week,
Yeah,
it's grey and miserable, but yeah,
I
we're good.
know. It's so like this is moody. I don't think anybody would believe because you're sitting in front of a window as well, right? And I'm sitting
Yeah,
in front of a window, right? We're
cool.
sitting in front of a window, and it's 8:30 in the morning in the UK, and it looks as though it looks like this looks more like a fireside chat, like it's 8:30 in the evening.
Brilliant.
um, yeah, I have actually sort of pondered about doing an after hours
Mm,
LinkedIn live because there's somebody that I know that does it around actually a topic that's not too dissimilar. So it's actually around like like psychological well-being at work and mental health, etc. But basically, she does two LinkedIn lives. So one of them, I guess, is more, just like more professional and sort of like around the workplace. And then she does an evening one, which goes deeper into like sort of mental health topics and it's just a little bit a little bit freer with the conversation, which is
yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I literally have an open fire in my house as well, so we could do a real fireside chat. Amazing.
That's for next time. We'll put that in the set. Oh, and so it's 8:30 on a Friday morning. Sam, you are live on LinkedIn. Please do not swear. I have to say that since last week's guest who did drop the odd F-bomb. So if you did hear that last week, apologies. Yeah, it was a funny one. Good morning or an evening with Oprah. It seems. I know this is like the evening show. Good morning, Junior Beeman. How are you doing? Junior's got to be one of the most faithful listeners on here, and he affectionately calls me Oprah, which I'm going to take every day of the week. Junior, good morning, Junior. Meet Sam. Sam, meet Junior.
Hi, lovely to meet
Ju- Junior is a global co-chair at NatWest, formerly led the Rainbow Network and now leads the multicultural networks. That's really cool, and also is an award-winning, acclaimed leader, role model, LGBT future leaders person, all of that good stuff.
you. Amazing.
Um, yeah, incredible. And we've also got so if you're joining us live, please do say good morning in the chat. It's great to see who we've got. We've also got Paula Castro. Good morning, Paula. How are you doing? Good way to start a Friday. It is, even though it looks as though it's evening, but I promise you we are live. It's just that we've got a storm. I believe it's called Storm Claudia, is what I
Yes.
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wondered whether it was, I haven't seen the spelling. So is it really Claudia as in cloudy, or is it Claudia? I'm guessing it's Claudia.
LAU, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. Cloudy by name, cloudy by nature. Aiteo, good morning, Aiteo. How are you doing? And of course, the incredible good morning, happy Friday. I'm not sure who that is. I because I can't quite see that name. Good morning, Pauline Isherwood, joining us from north of the border. How are you doing? How's the weather up there? Is it as gloomy and rainy as down here, or are you bucking the trend and have you got blue skies? Because you never know. And good morning, happy Friday to LinkedIn user one. So I'll name you. I've got Sam Neath with me. Sam, I know we were sort of like talking about how our weeks have been. You've had a busy week this week, right?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, yeah. All sorts of conferences, events, and workshops all seem to fall in the same week for me. So yeah, I've been all over the place, but it's been good.
It's the season. It's the season. But we were saying actually that when you work in this field, and I know most of the people that we've got on do, there is something about, because it's such a fast moving field anyway, fast moving discipline, the one of inclusion, etc. You do often have to be, either attending things or going on courses or attending roundtables just to kind of find out what's the latest, and more importantly, actually, what are people doing about it. So based on whether it's legislation, etc., that's come out, what are people actually doing, and how are organizations responding. Good morning. How do I pronounce your name? Is it Fianala? Is it Fianala? Is that how I pronounce it? Fianala Power. Please do correct me if I pronounced it incorrectly. Feeling you in the weather. We're under an orange rain warning in Wexford Islands. Oh, it's the UK weather. It's UK and Ireland. It's gloomy skies this morning. Good morning from the West Midlands, and it's Rebecca. Good morning, Rebecca. Really good to have you with us. I've got with me Sam Neath, and Sam. We've got a tradition on here where where I get ChatGPT or Claude sometimes actually to read out the to create the bio for my special guest. It's dry in Scotland. See, bucking the trend. We've had non-stop rain for days, but it's now dry. They've sent it down south. So this is what ChatGPT wrote for you today. I'm joined by Sam Neath, Global Culture and Inclusion Manager at SLR Consulting. Sam has led diversity, equity, inclusion, and wellbeing initiatives across major organisations, including BAE Systems, helping to shape cultures that prioritise psychological safety and belonging. Her passion for inclusion, which it does for a lot of people, began through her work as chair of BAE Systems LGBTQ plus employee network, where she saw firsthand how ERGs can create lasting cultural change. Beyond her corporate work, Sam also serves as a DE&I trustee for Sunflowers Suicide Support, a charity supporting those affected by suicide, and has previously volunteered with Pride in Gloucester and By Pride UK. She brings a wealth of experience in creating psychologically safe workplaces where people feel valued, heard, and free to be themselves. How did ChatGPT do? Marks out of 10.
You can see into my soul. Yeah, it's quite scary actually. I'd say that's a very positive and very complimentary summary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well done, ChatGPT. You've earned your subscription today. Finula, thank you. Do you know what? That's just one Irish name that I've never known the pronunciation for. Finula. I'm really glad to have learned that. I remember once somebody when I was working on a program, he said to me, "How do I pronounce this word that looks like Siobhan?" And I was like, "Oh, that's Siobhan." You know, once you understand these spellings, you always want to share the information, which kind of links to what we were talking about when we were prepping for this, because we were sometimes talking about, when people make clumsy errors when we're corresponding when we're communicating and connecting with each other on a human level. So we're going to get into that in terms of how to handle it. But let's start off with your journey to culture and inclusion in this world, because the path from ERG leader to inclusion manager is actually, I'm not going to say it's common, but a lot of people do end up taking that route. So just tell us about that. What was it that spurred you from ERG leader into D&I?
Yeah, so I kind of had a bit of a wiggly career route anyway. I was one of these people that never really knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. And so I just sort of tried quite a lot of stuff. And ChatGPT mentioned my career at BAE Systems. I was really fortunate there to be able to try quite a lot of different roles, and I tried some consulting work, some sales work, and then more internal roles around resource management. But anyway, as I was kind of going through my 8 years that I ended up being there, I sort of at one point looked up, do we have an LGBTQ plus employee resource group? Being LGBT myself, I thought I'd really love to get involved. And I found that we did have one. And then sort of quite quickly after joining, I had the opportunity to lead that network, which was incredible and a really great learning opportunity for me. But as with most ERG roles, it was kind of, on the side of my day job and, in my spare time and sort of pushed to the side slightly. However, I was finding, actually, I want to be doing that more than I want to be doing what was a sales job at the time. And finding that actually that was really where my passion was, not only in the LGBT space, but then the kind of exposure to the broader DE&I work. And so I think I just badgered my now old boss at the time, Natalie, who was our D&I lead. And an opportunity came up to do kind of a secondment initially in the central team there. And then that kind of turned into a full-time role. And the rest is history, I guess. I was there for a few years doing that, and then wanted a change of industry. So I moved over to SLR. And again, as ChatGPT said, part of my journey was very much looking at voluntary work. How can I develop my space in the voluntary sector in order to bring that back in the workplace and be an incredible DE&I manager. So yeah, originally through the Pride charities, and then more recently with the suicide support charity in Gloucestershire. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I was literally about to ask you, what did you do to almost like, I guess, round out your skills? Because there's one thing going from like leading one particular ERG with an identity that typically, aligns with your own like lived experience, and then going to then the broader like inclusion and culture work where you have to then look after everyone, and actually, you have to have other things in your toolkit, like employment law and all these other kinds of things. So I was going to ask you how you rounded out those skills. Really, did you, in addition to that, was there any other kind of like training or anything formal? What would you recommend as almost like, I guess, having that biggest experience in terms of equipping you to do the broader inclusion role, coming from being an ERG chair? Just really curious, and I think it would be really relevant to a lot of people listening today.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I must say, like, passion is often why a lot of us get into this work, right? And that is fantastic, and it's amazing to come from a place of lived experience. However, it's not everything. You can't just be passionate and then be great in this space. And so when I was sort of identifying that I wanted to go in this work, I definitely used the charity sector as an opportunity to learn more. That was quite specific within LGBT, though. So I also, though, found that the previous experience I'd had was really, really relevant. So I'd worked in recruitment and resource management, so understanding an element of HR was helpful. I also happened to do, I trained and was a business change consultant for a while. And as we know, like, a huge amount of what we do in this space is essentially managing change programs. And even my sales work, to a certain extent, it's about building relationships with people. That was always a really common thread through my work. So that was all really fortunate and genuinely has come together to help me be the best kind of D&I or culture leader now. Additionally, I did come across a course. It was a level 7 course in equality. God, what was it called? I can't remember. It's around like strategic approaches to equality, diversity, and inclusion. I think. I studied that again in my spare time, which was a really helpful qualification, and I really was able to apply that to the workplace as well. So
great. I love that. A little bonus conversation there for anybody, because I know we've got quite a few network leads on this. So good morning, Andrea Southall, who I know a former network lead at RICS. Interesting the things that you mentioned there, and obviously passion is great. But it's not enough, right? And the skill sets you mentioned. I mean, obviously, you already had a little of the HR kind of background, business change, some of the other skills that I often hear of. And please do feel free to drop some in the chat. Those of you that maybe have made this sort of transition, but things like behavioral psychology. So these are all like the tools, alongside the equality and equity piece and employment law as well. These are all the tools that we need in our toolkit, right? Especially if you're going from like an ERG role into that broader role. Right, we're going to get into psychological safety because it's a real, it's something that you've really sort of like, I don't want to say niche down into, but it's a real sort of, I don't want to say passion, but it's an area that you feel is really important and quite critical to this work. You sort of almost like see it as foundational to what a lot of the work that we do around inclusion and culture. So before we get into it, how do you define psychological safety, and why is it so important now more than ever?
Yeah, sure. Well, without trying not to quote Amy Edmondson, I'd say, it's a space where we've got empathy, we've got transparency, we've got trust, and we've got curiosity. And essentially, it's about creating that place where people can speak up. And we use this terminology, speak up, quite a lot. And what does that really mean? Essentially, it's about people being able to kind of be themselves, sharing their ideas, challenging, asking questions, and admitting mistakes, all of those kind of things. And sort of try to apply this to a personal life context. And if we all think about this, we have psychological safety mostly in our personal lives. So we'll always have that group of friends, our partner, our family, and you don't have to think twice about what you're saying. You might have conflict sometimes. You might often want to share your weirdest dream that you just had. You ask meaningful questions of each other, and you do all of that without thinking, "Oh God, if I say this, am I going to be punished or humiliated or ignored if I do this?" You know, and so as much as where it's possible and appropriate, we really want to make people feel that they can be themselves and do that when they're at work. And in terms of the benefit, why this is so important, I'd say, I mean, psychological safety, I think, has always been important. It's kind of a newish terminology that we use quite a lot. It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, but it's always been important. Ultimately, I mean, it's beneficial from a kind of well-being and inclusion space. And as you said, you know, for me, it's really foundational to create those feelings of inclusion and well-being. But also, it's just really beneficial for a business. You know, I think we can all think about what it's like when you can show up and do your best and you're excited to be part of something, excited to be part of business. If you don't have psychological safety, you can't really do that. And I'd say particularly at the moment, we're in a really difficult time. We're in a world of polarization. It's exacerbated by the social media platforms and algorithms and all these media forms that we have, you know, in our faces every day. And it's creating vision. And you know, what psychological safety does is enable us to have that space where people can share really openly and debate and be respectful from each other and have those differing views, but use them to come to positive outcomes rather than separation, arguments and hatred between different groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. And as you were kind of like talking through the definition of the psychological safety, there's that lens of psychological safety for the individual and what that means in terms of, you know, the individual's experience and being able to bring themselves to work and do their best work and share their ideas and their thoughts freely. And it also got me thinking about, I mean, there was a great book many years ago. It was called Willful Blindness, I want to say it was called, but it was basically about how in corporates, almost like when people have views that are, you know, maybe go against the majority, but it's a view that, oh, the company's maybe doing something wrong, or that you know, course of action isn't correct, and people are afraid to speak up. You know, often there are, you know, really sort of devastating consequences. And so I believe this book was called Willful Blindness. It's many years ago, but it linked back to, it just made me think, as you were describing the definition of psychological safety, when you don't have that sort of environment where people can speak up, and for example, things are going very wrong, and it doesn't have to be like in terms of like personal, but in terms of business performance, you know, or there's a planned strategy or a planned approach to something, and actually people can see that it's not going to work or they've got issues with it. Creating an environment where people can speak up and say, I don't think that's going to work, is really important. Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it has real, you know, not only does it affect like, you know, people and our sense of self, but it can have real sort of business and commercial consequences as well for organizations. So it's quite interesting. But it links to something, I want to get onto something that you mentioned, which is this thing around, you know, this balance between psychological safety to speak freely and almost like the freedom to completely be yourself, even if you're offending somebody else, right? So even if you're, you know, even if you're going to offend or you're going to say something that somebody's going to find offensive. So I was just talking off air before we started. There's been a podcast released this week by New York Times, which some people may have seen. And I think the title is something like, well, it was originally called something like Have Women Ruined the Workplace? And then I believe it was changed to something like Has Liberal Feminism Ruined the Workplace? Because they got so much backlash. But that was a really good example of somebody giving a view, and actually, and having listened to the whole podcast, they're talking about behaviors in the workplace and things that have changed in the workplace, and the role that potentially women and or liberal feminism or feminine energy, however you want to describe it, has had. And so they're sharing this view, and it's caused complete uproar. So I guess that's probably a really good example of, you know, somebody comes to work with a very unpopular opinion and potentially quite offensive. Just what are your thoughts about that in terms of, you know, how organizations manage that, you know, and manage those spaces?
Yeah, God, the old free speech argument, isn't it? And This is it's so difficult to get this right, and we talk in the D&I space all the time about bringing your whole self to work, right? But do we really mean that?
Yeah.
What if that whole self is coming through as discrimination, if it's genuinely harmful to other people and causing like unnecessarily and really negative conflicts? And how do you tell people to be themselves while balancing that? And at least in an organizational context, I'd say that's why we have, firstly, laws, the legislation, but also our policies and things like our values, kind of cultural statements, codes of conduct, that ultimately underpin how we expect people to behave in the workplace. And so it's kind of about using those policies and things to draw your red lines. What is an appropriate version of your whole self to be in the workplace, and where is it not? And where are we going to say no, zero tolerance towards that? I mean, ultimately, I think at a personal level, whether this is in work or outside of work, I think we could all benefit from just taking a pause and asking ourselves, if I share this view, is it going to cause someone else to be genuinely hurt? Could it be considered discrimination if I share this view, or particularly if I act on the view as well? So if I treat people differently because of that view. And if the answer is yes, it's probably maybe not the right thing to share, or not in the right context, especially in the workplace. And instead, how can we think about, I guess, what's really relevant to the conversation, and generally what's a more curious way of posing a view or asking questions rather than sharing, quite a view.
Yeah, I like that. Is there a more curious way of posing the view? And it possibly links to what Sarah's saying here. Good morning, Sarah. We can't control how others will respond, but if we have the confidence and emotional self-control to deliver it the right way, then we can hold our head high. Definitely something about the delivery, Sarah. I'm all with you on that. If you have behavioral expertise, rations that are measured, this will go a long way to creating safety. I think I'm totally with. Do you want to just comment on what Sarah was saying, Sam, there, in terms of about the emotional self-control around the delivery, etc., and just, I guess, a little bit more EQ, if I were to summarize it, in terms of having the emotional intelligence that comes with the delivery of a view that somebody else may not align with.
Yeah, it's a really, really good insight, and really important. And just to say, this comes easier to some people than others, particularly, if you've got neurodiversity thrown into the mix as well, or, completely different cultural background to someone else. It's really hard to maybe know what that line is and tread that kind of, within that gray space. I mean, I think there's two sides to it. There's firstly, how are you putting this across? As we said, with that curiosity, asking questions is just immediately less inflammatory than making statements, isn't it? And leading with curiosity, and obviously coming personally from a very empathetic place, and from a positive place is great. Also, though, I know you're sort of talking about, we can't help how others will respond, but we can help how we respond if it's happening to us, I suppose. And just to quote my old manager, I quote this all the time, so thank you, Natalie, for this. Assuming positive intent, I think on the whole is a really good place to come from. So again, it's curiosity on both sides. And if you're hearing something that maybe you don't particularly agree with, try and understand where that person's coming from with that. Were they intentionally being harmful with that comment? Or, was it a genuine sort of positive curiosity that maybe said in a slightly clumsy way? Actually, the example of name pronunciation is a really good example, a really genuine example. Because, we're human beings, we can't always know how to pronounce someone's name correctly. But if we're asking, oh, how do you pronounce that? And being quite sort of open and positive about it, rather than just saying it incorrectly and then not ever fixing it, that's a whole different angle.
Yeah. I do love that saying, assume positive intent. Does that have boundaries though? I guess, how does somebody navigate that and almost not leave themselves open to disrespect and discrimination? Do you know what I mean? It's, because it's a term that I use a lot, and I also use the term grace. I talk about giving people grace. I mean, especially when you work in this space, I think, and I do, for us that are professionals, like DI professionals, I think that we almost should have more grace than a lot of others, because we're often working in a sandpit environment, actually, where people are learning, and you want people to be able to make mistakes and ask questions, and even push the boundaries if they need to in those kind of safe environments, right? That's what we've signed up for. I guess for people that don't work in the space that we work in, how can they navigate this in terms of assuming positive intent? So an example, I guess, if say, for, I know that we've got a few LGBTQ plus network leads on here at the moment, and many of those networks are really navigating some very difficult, very challenging times at the moment because of what I would almost call like the politicization of many issues, right, that are at the forefront. So what does that look like in terms of like the assuming positive intent, but also like knowing how to draw boundaries, linking back to, I guess, the psychological safety, what falls on the individual versus the organization? I don't know if you can talk to that maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Really. The example that springs to mind when you mention the LGBT community in particular is the kind of trans situation, the situation we're in, shall I say? Yes. And I can be very personally. I can often feel quite a lot of anger towards certain viewpoints. However, yes. and that's really hard to manage, right? Because I feel that people are misinformed, and I think a lot of opinions come from a misinformation place. And I suppose that's what I mean by assuming positive intent is if someone's expressing fear towards a certain community, why is that? What have they been told? What have they consumed? And again, the media plays a massive part in this, that's enabled them to feel that way. And so, for example, if cis women are feeling unsafe with trans women in their spaces, this is one of the hot topics at the moment. Why is that? Why, rather than just sort of shutting that woman down and being like, don't be ridiculous, like, and being personally offended by that kind of viewpoint. Again, going with curiosity, why is it that you feel unsafe? What has caused you to feel that? Is it because there's a headline in the newspaper that has caused you? Is that true? Have you researched this? Have you dug into it? And again, trying to create that kind of curiosity and asking questions. So yeah, I suppose from a personal perspective, but then equally, coming back to the kind of what are the red lines, right, and how to look after yourself. There are, assuming positive intent is great, curiosity is great, but ultimately, if someone is genuinely being discriminatory or hating towards you or a group of people that you're an ally of or whatever, ultimately you've got to look after your own well-being, and taking a step back out of that is often the best way to resolve it. So it's about doing what feels right for you in the moment. Challenging is not always the right answer.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that. I want to go back to what Sarah said actually here on and I don't know whether this is something that you've maybe you either have done or are thinking about in your organization as well, Sam. But Sarah here says more development in training in how to deliver a message and how the human brain responds in all its weird and wonderful ways will always help. I know, so when I've been doing training around things like, for example, what inclusion looks like on an everyday basis in things like meetings and interactions, talking about things like, how to deal with conversations where somebody holds a very different view to you is absolutely something I think that we should be talking about in the workplace. And, you mentioned earlier, Sam, guidelines. So guidelines around behaviors, around what things look like. I think especially, as you mentioned, Sam, for individuals that maybe have maybe are neurodifferent or, not as sort of like neurotypical, there's all kinds of ways of doing this. I feel even if organizations were to share, for example, short videos or just examples or some role plays of, what good looks like in this, I think, could probably help, because otherwise it's all a little bit, like woolly. And we kind of think that everybody has the same view of what it looks like, but it may not be correct. Sarah was saying here, how easy do you think it is to assume positive intent? Our brains are wired for safety, so working against us until we learn how to master this. Your thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, it takes practice for sure. Like I said, I mean, this is my job, right? I work in this space and I can still have certain conversations that really get my back up. I really I feel quite defensive over, and that's probably never going to go away. Like, that is a natural human response, of course. But practice really is what I'd say is, and again, taking a moment, take a breath, and think, how can I phrase my response as a question, and be curious and have an open. We talk about growth mindset, and actually related to the training sort of side. How do we instill the importance of that growth mindset and that curiosity? It's
absolutely. One of the things that I want to mention as well, because I know we've got one or two network leads on here. We had a check-in last week with a handful of LGBTQ plus leads in the UK, and particularly around, for example, these issues around gender. We talked about, for the ERGs, and I know Paula has mentioned the importance of ERGs around, I guess, how we create this psychological safety, and how we can support people in terms of like responding to these sorts of conversations. And we've got lots of conversations. We've got conversations affecting the LGBTQ plus community. We've got a lot of conversations around immigration, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism. There's just like everywhere, like lots of ERGs are facing these groups. But one of the things we talked about, I guess, was the importance of allies in some of these difficult conversations. And I guess actually thinking about it in terms of an ecosystem, if I call it that, an ecosystem of psychological safety. Potentially, if you have to take a step back, because as Sarah was saying, the brain wiring does make it quite difficult actually to always be that bigger person and all of that when you're sort of facing what feels like personal attack. But I think this is where allies can support. And when I say allies, I mean even like at the ERG level. So we've been really encouraging women's ERGs to be supporting LGBTQ plus allies at this moment. So the women's ERGs can have those conversations maybe with the individuals in the organisation that are concerned around women's safety, the sort of like gender critical beliefs, etc. And they could have those conversations and drill down into the why and all of that, because it doesn't affect them so personally. Do you know what I mean? But they can do that in a way where they are still being allies to the other networks. That's something we've talked about, using your fellow ERGs and peer ERGs to support you in some of these difficult conversations, almost like to take some of the emotion out, to encourage people to look at the facts and hold these conversations in a way that's respectful. So that's just one of the ideas I'd throw out there.
Yeah, and we, often ERGs, employee networks, have this, how we talk about the kind of emotional burden almost of being that spokesperson for that group, and often having to put yourself out there and do the education and the sharing of the lived experiences and stuff. Actually, the more that you can use your allies to help you, it reduces that toll. Yeah,
definitely, absolutely. We've talked a little bit about ERGs, actually, that's come up. And before I go on to the next question, we're going to talk about is what leaders can be doing. So what senior leaders in an organisation can be doing. Paula said here, I love that you're talking about allies. Sometimes people do not join certain groups because they think they do not belong in them. Most times we can learn a lot just from joining these groups and learning from their experience. That's absolutely. And, I was literally saying this on a call to somebody yesterday, and we were talking about the structure of their ERGs, and I was like, all groups really should be, such and such a group plus allies. Allies should feel welcome in all of the groups, even if a particular group maybe holds some sessions that are closed for very sensitive reasons, where they're dealing with very sensitive topics. But for the majority of them, Paula, I'm totally with you in terms of most of these groups should be open, and it should be quite clear that they're open to allies. And then in situations like this is where the allies then really have a chance to really step up, because being an ally is a verb, right? It's a verb, not just a noun. So what are your thoughts on that, Sam, in terms of how to really get allies involved with ERGs?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we for SLR context, you know, we've got 9 employee networks. All of them obviously are focused on different topics, but that we clearly state that they are open to everybody. And actually, letting people know they can join more than one is often a challenge. I don't know if other people have this; they think, "Well, I've got to pick one." And absolutely, we've done some training and workshopping on this as a group of employee networks to sort of say, how can we ensure we've got that space that's open for allies, almost defining what an allyship model is. You know, like you said, it's a verb, it requires proactivity. So we kind of have this sort of 4-step, you know, what does allyship mean? And it very much starts with learning, you know, and learning starts with being a member of an employee network. And kind of what that journey looks like is absolutely vital in what we do. And I know we'll kind of come on to leaders specifically, but how can we particularly engage that leadership and line management community as well? Because, you know, they're kind of, you know, they have a lot of burden actually almost to be allies to every group, because they don't know who's in their team. They could have, you know, hopefully a really wonderfully diverse team. How can they show allyship to everyone in, you know, in that space?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the as you call it, the burden on leaders, I guess it's kind of what they're paid for, right? But it's a burden in terms of like an EQ level. It is a burden, especially if they haven't like had the training, or it doesn't come naturally to them, or, you know, for example, if they are neurodiverse as well, it may well be a challenge. But what is it that leaders can do around this in terms of setting the tone for, you know, openness, open dialogue, authenticity, you know, bringing your whole self to work, etc., but making sure that it feels safe? How do leaders kind of create that balance?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that leaders particularly can do. For me, it starts a lot with role modeling, leading from the top. You know, and you know, we talk about this in our psychological safety training, but the importance and the benefits you get from leaders being open and authentic about themselves and their own human messy selves, it really helps others to do that. We literally see it when our employee networks do like webinars and have conversations. If you've got a senior leader on there, and we've got sponsors, for example, for each network, sharing their story and sharing their experience, you know, it really just makes people think, oh God, okay, I can talk about this. I can, you know, share my view as well. It's so powerful, and it really, it kind of demonstrates that even from the top of the organization that this is encouraged. So I'd say that, you know, that role modeling is kind of number one. Secondly, creating the right routes and the right spaces for people in your business. So often a barrier to psychological safety is that people just don't know where to go, or they only, you know, they think, do I go to my manager, but I'm not comfortable going to my manager. What are those other routes? Employee resource groups, obviously a massive, amazing route for people and to have that safe space to share. Things like mental health first aiders, people team, you know, to be a bit more structured with it, and line managers. And also, we don't love anonymous reporting because it doesn't necessarily signal psychological safety if people feel that they need to be anonymous. However, it is a route, and, you know, that should be provided for people. So yeah, create those routes and those spaces, because not everyone is going to be comfortable going to the same place with their feedback, ideas, etc.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I love what you said about senior leaders sharing. You know, I know some organizations do this really well, and they sometimes do, for example, if there are what I call, you know, big set pieces, whether that's like a big town hall, or, you know, some organizations have like monthly team briefings with, you know, some comms that are sent down from the top, and then each local manager sort of customizes it, whatever. But in many organizations, they some talk about having, some call it an inclusion moment, some have like a health and safety moment, whatever it be. But I think it is a real opportunity for leaders, as you say, to maybe bring a little bit of vulnerability, and maybe even to mention some of these you know, some of these topics that are kind of out there and the rest of society is talking about them. But I know in some organizations are almost saying, we don't want to be political, but the reality is politics is just, at the moment, it's just seeping into every facet of our lives. And I think some of that is, you know, as you were saying, like linked to like social media and the algorithms and all of that. So I almost think that, especially, you know, if the training has been given to these leaders, and it links back to some of what Sarah was saying, the training that's been given such that, you know, a leader can sort of stand up and acknowledge. So, for example, when there was like flags everywhere, right? How can you ignore that? Like, how can you ignore it? You can't go to work and just ignore. I mean, and for some individuals, actually, there were potential safety risks for individuals that were commuting through certain areas, right? So, um, this is where I think, whether it be training or whether it be, PR and comms or whoever, but, educating the leaders such that when they are sharing in some of these smaller, maybe more vulnerable moments, they can mention these things, but in a respectful way, because it goes back to what you're saying about the leaders then role modeling, how you talk about some of these topics, but in a way that is respectful, hold space for difference, right, is a term that I really love when it comes to inclusion. How do you talk about these topics in a way that you respect differences? And I think if leaders could role model that, it would make it so much easier in the rest of the organization. Do you know what I mean? I guess it's Nirvana. I'm painting a picture of Nirvana.
Yeah. And that kind of thing, having those well-being moments, those inclusion moments and stuff within day-to-day business kind of conversations or briefings, enables people to see as well that what we're talking about in this inclusion space is the business. It's not a separate thing. It's not an HR thing that sits over here and then the employee networks have got to worry about. It's part of everything that we do as a business and how every single one of us shows up at work. So I love the opportunities to create those spaces. It's not easy. There are priorities. But
it's not easy. It's not easy because we know that often people ascend through organizations without necessarily having either the emotional intelligence and or the appropriate line manager and or leadership training to kind of especially be able to hold some of those very difficult conversations. So maybe that's one of the takeaways actually, which we're going to get into soon, in terms of do we need to put into actually more manager and leadership training how to navigate very difficult, polarizing conversations, right? Maybe that's something we need to do. Junior, the emotion can fuel you, but the logic will help you lead with impact. Absolutely. Bringing the logic and the facts into it, me put my accountant's hat on. That's where I am every day. Absolutely every day. That's my sweet spot. A really important, Fionnuala, a really important point on creating psychological safety is to understand that it is a collective responsibility. Yeah, it can't really be done by one person, can it? Would you argue, though, that leaders have a little bit more of that responsibility to do that? I'm just throwing that to you, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually thinking real practically how we're rolling out training on psychological safety within SLR. And we very much started at the top. We were like, right, our leaders need to get this, understand this, do the role modeling, lead with by example. And then we kind of going down through the management layers. And what we teach to our leaders and managers is a very different conversation to what I have with our early careers, for example. So literally yesterday, I was delivering psychological safety awareness training with our, really early careers, our graduates within our near region. And the conversation is different. It's more how can you, obviously everyone can create psychological safety within their teams and demonstrate that within their teams, but also encouraging them to speak up and to have a voice and to know where the roots are. And that's kind of more the angle for that group of people. Whereas for leaders, it's like, these are the behaviors that you are expected to show.
Yeah, interesting. So it kind of does link to Fionnuala's point here in terms of you want to be tackling it at all levels, like, to this point around it being a collective responsibility. So it might look slightly different in terms of the expectations of the leaders, and because obviously they're the leaders of the organization, but the reality is, right, that we all lead in different ways. And so those conversations with everybody throughout the organization, that's really great. Let's just, as we wrap up then, one action from your view, one action that either individuals or organizations can take pretty much straight away to strengthen psychological safety, but also openness in organizations as well.
Yeah, and outside of a whole psychological safety sort of training rollout program, let's be sort of micro with this, organizationally and at a really individual level, that kind of coming back to being brave, leading by example, showing that transparency and authenticity. We can all do that. Like you said, we can all show up as leaders in this space. Coming back to kind of that assuming positive intent, where appropriate and where safe to do so, and helping but that curiosity, asking the questions rather than, sort of shutting things down and being divisive.
Yeah.
Ultimately, those kind of behaviors, that openness, authenticity, and that curiosity will help create the space that is safe and is open for like learning and showing others. Lead by example.
Yeah. And the being brave, I love that. Being brave, being vulnerable. One of the things that I shared with you that I don't often share with people is I'm really bad with pronouns. Maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on myself, but I can be quite bad with things like that. And I've tried various strategies, but that being brave and, sharing some often, where we make mistakes. So for example, if I misgender somebody or, one of the other examples we talked about before we in our prep call was the whole "where are you from" question, right? In terms of how you handle things like that. And there is just this thing around, and I'm sure it's something you cover in your psychological safety awareness training, but understanding how to deal with interactions that aren't perfect, right? Because none of us is perfect anyway. So understanding how you deal with those reactions, with those interactions where it doesn't go as you planned and you maybe put your foot in it, how do you apologize? How do you sort of just handle it gracefully on both sides and respectfully and kind of try to repair that bridge? If you think that a bridge was broken, it's probably the one thing that I would also leave people with as well. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Sam?
Yeah, no, I agree. And we can, if coming from, genuine mistakes such as that. And I think I gave an example of, I'm genuinely curious about where people are from. And, how do you ask that question firstly in a way that's kind of respectful and polite? It's, there's a very big difference between, oh my goodness, what's your heritage? Versus, oh, but where are you really from? There's really different, in the tone there. It's, and then kind of correcting that almost, I feel like sometimes over apologizing can maybe make things not worse, but it can make a big deal out of it. Actually, I think most of the time people just want to, oh, I'm sorry about that. I'll get it. I'll try and learn for next time and then move on. I think that could be really short, simple interactions that can just improve people's experience.
Yeah, amazing. Sam, if where do you live mainly online? Are you mainly on LinkedIn? If people want to connect with you and sort of follow up with the conversation, where's it best to get hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is great. I'm sometimes terrible at reading my LinkedIn messages, but no, please do connect with me and reach out if you want to continue this conversation, of course.
Yeah, amazing. Sam, it's been so lovely having you. And I feel as though we could have gone, we could have gone into quite a few rabbit holes, but we kind of kept it on topic. So thank you. But thank you so much for your time. For everybody that has joined us this week for this really important conversation, I hope it's encouraged you to maybe do something different. And I know, we've sort of like left you with a couple of suggestions. And obviously within Sam's organization, I know you're rolling out this whole approach in terms of like psychological safety at every level of the organization. Definitely something to consider, whether or not it's badged as psychological safety or it's something that's just embedded into inductions, line manager training, etc. All of the whole piece. I think it is incredibly important, especially at this time, because it's the world is crazy, right? It's the reality of it. So thank you all for joining us if you have joined us live, and if you're watching on the replay, thank you so much for taking 48 minutes out of your day to watch this. Sam, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Perfect. All right. And everybody have a great weekend. Stay safe with this crazy rainy weather. Take care.